What is up guys, welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and today I'm taking you over just an insane $1,000 gaming PC build for 2018. This is a really special system that is RGB'd up to the max. If this video hits 500 likes in the first week of being uploaded, I'll even give this system away, so stay tuned for that one and give it a big old like rating. Without any further ado though, let's jump into it. Pure VPN is the ultimate way to keep your online browsing secure and private. Unlocking region-locked Netflix shows using port forwarding for a competitive gaming edge or torrenting, Pure VPN has it covered. A vital part of your next gaming PC. Learn more at the links in the description below. For me, the real sweet spot of this system lies at that 1080p ultra settings marker, whilst hitting the all-important 60 frames per second. And that's not to say 1440p gaming isn't possible, it certainly is, if you're prepared to sacrifice a couple of settings and a bit of frame rate in the latest AAA titles particularly. Now though, let's dive into the parts which accumulate to make this build just so special. But first, if you aren't already following me on Instagram, it's at GeekaWhat. Make sure you do so. I've been giving away some Steam keys on my Insta story, so you do not want to miss out. Back to the parts that I selected for this build though, and kicking it off as always with the CPU. The AMD Ryzen 5 2600 is the perfect choice in my opinion. 6 cores and 12 threads give it some great multi-threaded credentials and make this chip not a bad bet for a bit of 1080p video editing or game streaming. You also get a base clock speed of 3.4 with a boost of 3.9 GHz, which make that single threaded performance not too bad at all. The Intel chips do tend to excel in this regard, though this is offset in my opinion by the high core count of these AMD CPUs. Furthermore, the low 65 watt TDP means this thing runs super duper cool, and it is unlocked as well, which means you can overclock it to get a bit more free performance if you wish. That brings me nicely onto the next part in this build, the CPU cooler. Now, it's no secret that the included coolers with the AMD Ryzen lineup are actually pretty fantastic. This is the Wraith cooler that comes included with the Ryzen 5 2600 in question, and whilst it will certainly stop the CPU from thermal throttling, it doesn't awfully do much in the way of aesthetics or allowing much overclocking headroom. Instead, I opted for the Deepcool GAMMAXX GT. It takes the whole RGB concept to the max and looks fantastic. Not only is the RGB fan included also really quite quiet, the heatsink design is pretty simple, but much more substantial than you'll find on obviously the AMD stock coolers. No criticism of AMD, but a good add-on nevertheless. Coming in at under $40, it's also pretty cost effective, and I think just sort of adds a whole new dynamic to this build. For the motherboard in this build, I selected the MSI B450 Gaming Pro Carbon AC. This board addresses one of the big complaints people have with building a budget PC. It actually includes Wi-Fi and 802.11 AC Wi-Fi nonetheless, so you can get going from the outset without any issues. Furthermore, you've got 4 RAM DIMM slots and of course support for CPU and memory overclocking on that B450 chipset. The B450 chipset, in my opinion, is pretty ideal as it's a good sort of price to performance value choice, though this board definitely sits on the upper end of that spectrum. You've got a good rear I/O, good expandability with a really nice aesthetic, and I'll link it with all the other components in the description below. For the RAM in this build, I selected a new kit from ADATA. This is their Spectrix D41 with a grey heat spreader. This RGB RAM kit comes in a 2x8GB configuration. 16 gigs is in my opinion the sweet spot for gaming in 2018. 8 can definitely cause some bottlenecking, and 32 is plain overkill. The diffused RGB addressable strip up top can be controlled through software directly through that RAM DIMM slot. There's no faffing about with extra cables, which is a really welcome addition. Furthermore, that grey heat spreader design looks absolutely phenomenal and blends in nicely with this system's aesthetic. For the case in this build for the chassis, I went for the brand new Sharkoon Nightshark. It's a company for which we've not heard much from in recent years, but it seems the resurgence may very well be on. This particular case is feature packed for the price point, with 3 addressable RGB fans included that plug up to a universal RGB hub and controller that work with the ASUS Aura Sync, MSI Mystic Lite and GeekaWhat RGB software suites. You also get some rear ventilation and a GPU support bracket, alongside a pretty peculiar, perhaps a little bit antiquated 5¼ inch drive bay mount at the front. You also get some really nice ventilation up front, on the bottom and at the rear, and the tempered glass side panel not only looks good but is super easy to install. Seriously, more user friendly than any Corsair, Cooler Master or Thermaltake chassis I've had in the past. For the price point, you can't really go too far wrong with this case, and I'm definitely going to be using some more Sharkoon cases in some builds soon. For the graphics card in this build, I selected the ASUS GTX 1060 6GB, the ROG STRIX version. This particular card's got 3 fans, so cooling here is really quite nice and comes factory overclocked. Truth be told, any 6GB GTX 1060 is going to serve you well, though this particular card would be my preferred option. Do a bit of shopping around and you're bound to find a deal. As I said earlier, 1080p, 60fps, ultra settings with a bit of 1440p gaming is really where this card sits nicely. For the storage in this build, I selected a 2000GB Seagate Barracuda. The 7200 RPM speed is pretty quick as far as hard drives go in the standard 3.5-inch form factor. Going to give you loads of room for your movies, music and your games. The issue with it is it's not particularly quick and boot up times aren't going to be all that fantastic. You could pick up a more budget-friendly SSD like ADATA's SX8200, but instead I went for a new solution from Intel of all people. This is their Optane memory. This uses dynamic caching, if you will, to look at your most frequently used files, whether that be booting up Windows or booting up your favourite AAA game, and it puts them on the fast flash storage. It looks like an M.2 SSD, but acts slightly differently. This is a really good way of affordably speeding up that hard drive in your build, accelerating its speeds, if you will. I'm actually going to do a full kind of written article on the website with some testing to explain just how this thing works, and you can find that in the card section here. For the final part in this build for the power supply, this unit's from Cooler Master. It's their MasterWatt 650 with an 80+ bronze certification, meaning it's pretty efficient, a semi-modular interface, which means you only plug in the cables you need, and a fanless mode which keeps it nice and quiet under low loads and utilizations. You can't go too far wrong. It's also really affordable, and the all black sleeved cables add a really nice edge, especially at the price point. I also picked up Cooler Master's brand new ATX 24-pin 90-degree adapter to make the cable management a little bit clean, though this definitely isn't necessary, but a nice addition nevertheless. That just about wraps it up for today's build though. If you enjoyed it, give it a big old like rating. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Remember, 500 likes and I'll give away a system just like this. As always though, I think we'll see you in the next GeekaWhat video.
Come on now, it's alright, let your emotion show.